we're actually, according to our plan, we're going to try to cover two rather interesting fellows and judges. We'll see how far we get tonight. Since we're short 1 week due to Thanksgiving, we only have 12 weeks to squeeze in everything we want to do. So we're going to talk about this fellow Abimelech tonight. Hopefully you had a chance to read Judges chapter 9. And it's kind of a somewhat dark story, so I thought, well, I'll make the background black. Yes, it's Halloween, but also this guy's a mess. And I really, when I first started reading it, of course, probably had read it before, but I thought, wow, why is this story here in the Bible? But as I thought more about it, and Hannah and I talked some about it, I began to realize, it's not just about him. It's kind of includes all the people surrounding him as well. And we'll talk more about that before long here. But who was Abimelech's parents? We talked last week about his dad. That was Gideon, right? So Gideon and a concubine actually the concubine gave birth to Abimelech. And his name, interestingly, means, brain lapse there. Boy. You just look at something and then it kind of goes, ooh, the joy of getting older. Son of a king, or my father is king. Sorry, there it is in my notes. Okay, which is kind of we're gonna see that's a little bit of irony. But Abimelech was one of 70 sons, which I can't even wrap my mind around that. Obviously, Gideon had multiple wives. And Abimelech eventually got to where, in the first few verses, we read that he talked to the people of Shechem and actually got his mother kind of involved. And he said, which is better for you, to have all 70 of us trying to coordinate and rule, or maybe we just need one ruler? Don't you think that would be a good idea? And of course he's thinking, I'll be the guy. I will be the ruler of the area. And the people of Shechem, I guess they I don't know where their heads went. Here they'd been enjoying all these 40 years of peace brought on by Gideon's deliverance. But he convinces his mother's household to support him. And then they gave him some money from an idol's temple. And Christy Huntsman says, you can tell a lot about a person when you see where their campaign contributions come from. And so he takes this money and hires some worthless and reckless fellows, and they kill most of his brothers. One fellow, Jotham, manages to escape. He kills all the others. So I guess that would be 68 murders. And it's very ironic because Gideon had said back in chapter 8, verse 23, the men of Israel had asked him to rule over us, both you and your son and your grandson also. But Gideon said, no, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. So Gideon recognized God should be king. But Abimelech had other ideas. And so maybe he's living up to his name. Even though his father wasn't king, he sets himself out to be the ruler in the land. And about 3 years go by, and they start to realize we've kind of made a mistake. But before that, we have in chapter 9 this kind of interesting little parable. And I thought we might read that together. And Jotham goes up to the top of Mount Gerizim and lifts up his voice and cries out. And this is verse 7. And he said to them, "Listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, 'Reign over us.' But the olive tree said to them, 'Should I cease giving my oil, with which they honor God and men, and go to sway over trees?' Then the trees said to the fig tree, 'You come and reign over us.' But the fig tree said to them, 'Should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to sway over trees?' Then the trees said to the vine, 'You come and reign over us.' But the vine said, 'Should I cease my new wine, which cheers both God and men, and go to sway over trees?' Then all the trees said to the bramble, 'You come and reign over us.' And the bramble said to the trees, 'If in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon.'" So the three actual trees, really, in my mind, just two, and then a vine, they all three decline to be the ruler of the trees. And they all have their reasons. They produce things that people enjoy. We have olives and figs and grapes and all of these great things that they feel like, well, if we spend our time ruling over the trees, we might not get these other things done, and people enjoy this. So no, we would rather serve people and do these good things than set ourselves up as the ruler. But the bramble, which is basically a thorn bush, and it's considered a worthless, dangerous plant, accepts the offer. But he tells them, if you don't get in my shade, which is kind of interesting. I don't know that a thorn bush makes very much shade, but the bramble says, "Come and be in my shade. But if not, then fire is going to come out and destroy you." And so according to, after the parable, Jotham says, "Now therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity," this is verse 16, "in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as he deserves, for my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian. But you have risen up against my father's house this day, and killed his 70 sons on one stone, and made Abimelech the son of his female servant king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother. If then you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beth Millo. And let fire come from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech." So Jotham sees nothing good coming out of this relationship. But he knows that God is in control, I suspect. And so even though this situation has gone awry, he feels like it's going to be taken care of. They're not going to escape God's judgment. Okay, so the goodwill is over. If we get to verse 22 in chapter 9, we see that about 3 years have passed, and it's Scripture says God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And it's not like God's not, dealing with demons here or anything, but he is controlling the situation. And so the people of Shechem began rebelling against Abimelech. They put their confidence for a while in a fellow named Gaal to challenge Abimelech, but he was defeated. And this chapter is very long, so I decided we weren't going to read verse by verse. Hopefully you read, and if not, please go home and read it. But Gaal thinks he's going to maybe challenge Abimelech, but no, that doesn't happen. And Abimelech's very angry at this point. He's tried to, be the great king, and these people aren't cooperating. They got some other fellow to try to cause a rebellion. So he starts attacking and killing the people of Shechem. And a bunch of them run to a tower, and they get into this tower, and Abimelech sets the tower on fire, and all of the people that were trying to get away from him die in this tower. So he's one crazy man. He has done a very horrible thing, and he's so angry that he gets some salt and sows it in the field so that he can ruin the soil, and no one's going to be able to grow crops for a long time. So he's just very vindictive and angry. And then he even goes to another city, Thebes, and attacks it. He's just so mad that he's kind of bloodthirsty at this point, and he tries to burn that tower. But once again, we see a woman playing a role here in the story, and she grabs a millstone, which apparently it must have been like the top part of a millstone, because the bottom a lot of times would be a very big piece of rock, I read. But she gets this big rock and drops it right on Abimelech's head. And amazingly, he's not killed instantly. I guess he's mortally wounded. And so he's lying on the ground dying. And what concerns him, not repenting for what he has done, but he tells his armor bearer, I don't want to die by the hand of a woman, so kill me. And so the armor bearer does that. He kills him. And so God balances the scales. He brings around the just punishment, if you will, for Abimelech and his attitude. So, like I said, I really struggled with this story because I don't think Abimelech is technically considered a judge. I've seen, people like to make lists. I've seen lists of the judges. Most of them he's not listed, but I did see some where he was. So I wouldn't view him as a judge. He was a reckless, self-centered, terrible person, and not really fit to be leading the people of God. So it's just kind of an amazing thing. So, I think, God lets people make their choices, but he is going to see that his plan is ultimately fulfilled. But he allows this to kind of go on because, notice, no one consulted God about Abimelech being king. No one said, hey, let's find out if this is the right thing to do. But now they give him some money, and then he kills his brothers, which was pretty much a clue that no, he's not in God's plan. And they allow all this to go on, and then, of course, then they receive just punishment for what they've done. So I'm thinking about the people of Shechem, and I thought, they're kind of almost the point of the story, in that they made the decision to agree to, yeah, be our guy. They could have said, no, 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 God's our king. Remember your dad said, no, he did not want to be the king, that the Lord should be the king. But they didn't do that. They, for whatever reason, were entranced with him. I don't know. Maybe he was a impressive fellow in strength and ability, probably in arrogance, I'm sure. And so they allowed him to become their leader. They chose him in a sense. They gave him money. Here, have some money from the idolatrous temple, and then Abimelech uses that to kill off most of his family. So I think what we really kind of want to focus here on in the story is leadership, and that takes on lots of different areas. Even women, while we're not leaders specifically in the church, there's lots of other ways that many of you are leaders in various ways, and but certainly we also follow leaders, and we want to think about those leaders. And Jotham's parable kind of points out to us the difference between the three trees that said, no, we have these jobs to do, we're going to do that, we're going to serve and provide, we're not going to be leading. Not that leaders can't serve and provide, but in the parable they felt like this was their calling. And then we get the thorn bush that says, oh, okay, sure. They don't really have much to offer. Who likes a thorn bush, So the thorn bush chooses to become the leader, and the other trees seem to be okay with it. We don't see them saying, oh, no, no, no. They just kind of go on and do their thing, but they've got the thorn bush running things. So, I kind of did a little research and found some different thoughts about leadership, and I picked out these three qualities. When we look at the other three trees and the service they want to offer, then we realize that in a sense, they were true leaders, because they said, we're going to do the things that need to be done. And so leadership is not about dominance, but contribution and integrity. We want leaders, we want people to lead us that have integrity. And of course, Abimelech, I saw this sentence, and that's why I chose to use it for the title of the lesson. Abimelech's rise is a cautionary tale about choosing leaders based on ambition rather than character. So to me, that's where the people of Shechem fell way down, is they weren't choosing a guy that has character. They're choosing this fellow that's, maybe he promised them, money, power, who knows. Maybe he was very charismatic and just convinced them. But we want to beware of people like that want to be leaders just for the sake of their own ego, to be what we might call power-hungry people. But justice does prevail. God's justice prevails. And Jotham's curse is fulfilled and shows that justice will ultimately correct human corruption. So for us, we kind of reflect on that a little bit. This parable and challenges us to not just examine who we follow, but why. Why are we drawn to a particular person or group of people? Are we drawn to leaders who serve quietly and faithfully? I think we're very blessed here that we have a lot of people, not including the elders, but also many, many other people who quietly and faithfully serve. But sometimes, being people, being who we are, and others suffer from this. Those that shout the loudest, make the most noise, make the most promises, and sometimes we can be drawn to that, the flashy or the people that sound strong. So I think this parable urges us to choose wisely, because I think we're all mature enough to understand the consequences of poor leadership, what that can do for the family, for the church, for a business, any place you work, any organization you're involved in, our government, the country. The consequences of poor leadership affect not just me, but everyone around me, all of us. It's a community kind of thing. So that's my take on chapter 9. If anyone has a thought or something, another viewpoint or something that occurred to them, feel free to share. But things to think about. Judges is not it's kind of an interesting book to study. When we first got this book and started talking about it, I thought, I don't know. I wasn't sure about this. But it's been kind of interesting. It has its, it's scripture. So there's definitely going to be lots of worthwhile. But it's just a little more challenging to pull out sometimes.
I think another thing that you were talking about, how we need to be careful what kind of leaders we choose. Obviously, just ambition is one good character. He was the thorn bush in the parable because he was worthless. He was good only for the fire, and only fire could come from him. But I think part of the parable was also all of the other trees would have been good leaders, if you will, but they had better things to do. That's why Gideon refused to be king in the first place. It wasn't his role. He had things that God actually wanted him to do. So some of the time it's about choosing good leaders, but other of the time it's about not scrabbling for a leader when it's your responsibility to look after yourself in some ways, or to let God be the only ruler instead of
Yes. Oh, okay, great. Yeah. Very good. Good point. Thank you. Yeah, that's true. That we do have the supreme ruler. Yes. Very good. Okay. All right. Well, now we'll move on then to chapter 10. Let's see how we're doing on time. So we have Jephthah. You've probably heard of Jephthah, maybe, I hope. And chapter 10 starts off, if you're keeping track of all these judges, here we have two that just get this honorable mention, Tola and Jair. They arose to deliver Israel. They each judged about 23, 22 years. We're told an interesting fact about Jair, that he had 30 sons who rode 30 donkeys, and they had 30 towns. So they must have been maybe a little bit well off, perhaps. But so those are the two that get a mention. Nothing about what happened. Maybe all went well. They had a pretty uneventful tour of duty, perhaps. Be that as it may, so that's about 45 years that after the mess with Abimelech that they judged, and we can only assume all maybe was kind of peaceful. But then we see our cycle again. And so what happens in verse 6? What do we see? Once again, it starts off, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. And they served all kinds of idols. And in the past few stories, it's kind of been Midian or maybe Moab, but we've got the Baals and the Ashtoreths were kind of prominent. But now we've got all kinds of different gods. It's like God smorgasbord, I guess, here of things that they can worship. And two groups actually start kind of rising to prominence, and those are the Ammonites and the Philistines. And, you know, if you grew up hearing the stories of later on in 1st and 2nd Samuel, you're familiar with the Philistines, that they're always tormenting the people of Israel. So these people start to rise to prominence. And one thing that Hannah and I are hoping to at some point kind of weave in, if she had been able to be here, we might have tried to do more of that tonight, is thinking about culture. You know, the title of the book is Rising to Your Spiritual Potential, and I don't think we depend on our surrounding culture to help us reach our potential, at least certainly not spiritually. And this is a problem for the Israelites. They were assimilated into the surrounding culture. It caused them to compromise. And it just did not bring out good results. And there's, I think as women, there's different areas that, and many of us are a little older and maybe not, some things are not as prominent as when we were younger or when others are young. But there's several areas that we could talk about that in the culture that affect us. And so Hannah and I will kind of continue to talk about that. Certainly if there's something that's on your heart about, you know, maybe it's something you read about, you see, television is we stare at it some, but it brings into our homes sometimes not great stuff. And we have to be very, very careful and mindful of that. And certainly as women, you can see our role trying to live as Christian women. It sometimes feels a little out of place in the world for what you see in many women around us. Not all, not by any means. There's a lot of good people out there, but anyway, so kind of keep that in mind. We won't get into that tonight since Hannah's not here, but I think that's an important thing because that's what we see going on with the people of Israel, this culture thing. And so verse 7 says, God's anger burned against Israel once again. You know, here they go again. And so he's angry with them because, you know, it's kind of like, you know, if you have or had children and they don't pay attention always, you can get a little angry sometimes. Well, God kind of angry too. And so he sells them to the Philistines and the Ammonites, and verse 8, they shattered and crushed the Israelites that year. And for 18 years, they were tormenting them. And they didn't just stay in Gilead, but they crossed the Jordan, and they were even getting into Judah and Benjamin, kind of the stronghold of Israel, and just oppressing them right and left. Verse 9 at the end says, Israel was greatly oppressed. And let's see, turn here to right page, yeah. And so they cried out to the Lord and said, we've sinned against you. We have abandoned you and we worship the Baals. And God, it's interesting what goes on here. Up to this point, God's generally felt sorry for them and said, yeah, they're coming around. Let's get a deliverer and fix this. But he didn't do that right off this time. And I kind of wondered, is he getting enough of it? He's tired of this? Because he says to them in verse 11, when the Egyptians, Amorites, Ammonites, Philistines, Sidonians, Amalekites, and Maonites oppressed you, and you cried out to me, did I not deliver you from their power? So there he's listing off all these times, I've helped you, I've helped you, I've helped you. And he's just really, I think, getting tired of their empty words. He's saying that they can go talk to these other gods. He says, you have abandoned me in verse 13 and worshipped other gods. Therefore, I will not deliver you again. He's tired of them. Go and cry out to the gods you have chosen. Let them deliver you in your time of oppression. So, it's very interesting. He doesn't want to just hear a bunch of whining. He said, it's time to see some action here. I need to see some repentance. It's not enough just to say, oh, I'm sorry, help. He said, no. He wants them to turn away from this sinful behavior. So apparently they do. Because in verse 15, the Israelites said, we have sinned, deal with us as you see fit, only deliver us today. So they got rid of the foreign gods among them and worshiped the Lord, and he became weary of Israel's misery. So the Lord is always faithful, and when his people turn to him with their whole hearts, he responds. And he wanted a true response, not a whining, oh, I'm sorry, but get up, throw out the sinful behavior, throw out the false gods, and follow me. And so we see this time and again in Judges, this attribute of God, that he's merciful when we turn to him with our whole heart. And so Christy says, as long as there is breath in our body, we have the opportunity to turn back to God, no matter what we've done. But she says this time deliverance will be harder fought and last much longer, starting with Jephthah and ending with Samuel, which we won't talk about Samuel, but he's kind of the end of the Judges era. But God allows men to save the Israelites from these enemies. Just like the Israelites, the longer we allow ourselves to be enslaved by a particular sin, the more difficult it is to free ourselves from its grasp. That doesn't mean we can't be delivered. It's just we're going to have to work a little harder. We're going to have to be a little more determined, take action, and be pleasing to God. So, nothing said about a deliverer, though. God doesn't raise up someone and say, all right, let's go. I want you to gather up some soldiers and let's get after the Ammonites and the Philistines. And so the leaders of Gilead in verse 18 kind of have a little meeting, and they say to one another, well, who is the man who will begin to fight against the sons of Ammon? If he's willing, he shall be the head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. So they need a guy. They need another deliverer. But it's really kind of breaking from the typical pattern that God picks the deliverer. Now the people are the ones searching. But we really don't see any discussion between the people and God about Oh, remember those qualities of a leader that, Abimelech didn't show? Keep that in mind. So, we get to chapter 11, and we're introduced to a fellow named Jephthah. And he is from Gilead. He's a valiant warrior, but he's the son of a harlot. And Gilead was the father of Jephthah. So he is a true Gileadite. He just had a different mother. And apparently all of his brothers were born from Gilead's actual wife. She bore him sons. And when these sons grew up, in verse 2, it says, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, you shall not have an inheritance on our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. So Jephthah left, and he lived in the land of Tob. Some worthless fellows gathered themselves about him, and they went out with him. I think the thought is they might have been kind of like outlaws or some kind of roving gang. But the elders of Gilead knew about Jephthah somehow. Maybe he developed a reputation with what was going on with he and his group of fellows. So they went to him and said to him, come and be our chief, that we may fight against the sons of Ammon. And so they are commissioning the new leader, the new deliverer. And God is really not given much place in these proceedings. No mention of seeking God's will, praying, anything that might help make the decision. They just, this is him. We want him. And a commander was someone who performed some of the functions of a judge, but it is perhaps significant that the word judge is not used here. Nothing said about Jephthah being a judge, since God seemed to be the only one raising up judges. So, how does Jephthah respond when he's asked to be the new leader? Does he kind of, okay, yeah, I can do this. Yeah, look at me. No, he says, wait a minute, didn't you hate me? As he said in verse 7 we read, and drive me from my father's house? So now you've come to me when you're in trouble? And they say, for this reason we have now returned to you, that you may go with us and fight with the sons of Ammon and become head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. So now they're kind of changing their tune a little. They don't want just a military guy, but maybe he is going to be more their leader. And then finally, so there's some talk of God here, and Jephthah brings God up, and he says, if you take me back to fight against the sons of Ammon, and the Lord gives them up to me, will I become your head? And the elders said to Jephthah, the Lord is witness between us. Surely we will do as you have said. And so Jephthah is acknowledging God, that God wants to be in the process. And so they make him head and chief. And it says Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. The next section is kind of interesting. Let's see. Someone entitled it, Jephthah Rejects the Ammonites' Claims. And apparently Jephthah got the idea to kind of, let's talk to the Ammonites first. Let's don't just march out there and start flailing away at each other. And so he sends messengers to the king of Ammon and says, what's going on? Verse 12, what is between you and me, that you have come to me to fight against my land? And so the king sends back a message and says, well, Israel took my land when they came up from Egypt. And Jephthah says, hold on. Israel did not take away the land of Moab, nor the land of the sons of Ammon. When they came through from Egypt, they asked, "Can we come through Edom?" And the king of Edom said no. They asked to pass through Moab, and they said no. And so then they talked to the Amorites and said, "Let us pass through your land." But the king of the Amorites, came out and said, "No, let's just fight instead." And so all of this occurred a long time ago. And so God gave Israel the victory over the Amorites. There's all these different groups here. And Israel possessed the land of the Amorites. Well, over time, Ammonites, Amorites, they all kind of fight and stuff. And so Ammon manages to get some of the land, and it kind of jumbles all around. But mostly Israel has had possession of a great deal of the land for about 300 years. And Jephthah said, "So what's the deal? We've been there for 300 years. Why didn't you come in and try to get some of this land back, during that time? It's too much time's gone by." And he's really trying to negotiate with them. It's like, "Don't you see, we have this land. We've had it for a long time. God gave it to us. Back off." But the king of Ammon says no. He disregarded the message that Jephthah sent him. In verse 28, so the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Jephthah, and he went on to the sons of Ammon, and he made a vow to the Lord. And this is kind of a key thing here. He tells God, "If you will indeed," and this is verse 30, "if you will indeed give the sons of Ammon into my hand, then it shall be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering." Now, just quick question, and I don't know if we probably won't have a lot of time to get into this tonight. We may have to address some of it next week. But in verse 31, where he talks about the burnt offering, does everyone's translation say, "and I will offer it up as a burnt offering"? Or does anyone have "or"? You have "or." What version is that? The translation?
The New American Standard.
New American Standard. Okay. So I thought that's what I had here, but I have may have an older one. That's interesting, and that's kind of a key thing for something that we'll talk about. Anyway, Jephthah, he makes this promise to God, vow, that if we win, then I will do this. I will offer this to the Lord, or offer it up as a burnt offering. So in verse 32, Jephthah crossed over to the sons of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord gave them in his hand, and he struck them with a great slaughter. So, great victory. Jephthah comes home to his house, and who comes out the door to meet him? Not a lamb, not a goat, not something, that would be easy to give to God, or easier, but his daughter, his only child, comes out, and she's doing the tambourines and dancing because her dad's had a great victory. In verse 35, he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me, for I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot take it back." And so she said to him, "My father, you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me as you have said, since the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the son of Ammon." So he keeps his vow, and his daughter goes away to weep because she's going to remain a virgin, and she will have no children. Basically, his family dies right here. And then after 2 months of going away to mourn about this, verse 39, her father did to her according to the vow which he had made, and she had no relations with a man. Thus it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went to yearly to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite 4 days in the year. So the story closes out with kind of an interesting situation here. I feel like the big picture, draw back and not get bogged down in this or that. Jephthah kept his vow. Whatever that looked like, and there's people that say he actually offered his daughter as a sacrifice, burnt offering. And there's people that say, no. And I kind of tend to be in that camp more. That no, she was given in service to God, and she remained a virgin, and she served God the rest of her life. And someone made a comparison like when Hannah gave Samuel to the temple, he went to do service for God. So there's that. But I think the big thing is, and some people kind of think Jephthah was weak because he made this vow to God and then he suffered this great loss. But I think the main thing is he kept his vow to God. I'm not really saying we should negotiate with God. I'm not sure that's a good idea. But if we intend to do something, make a commitment is maybe a word that we use a little more today. When we commit, we're going to do this, and there's lots of aspects of life that involve commitment. We keep those commitments and really make an effort to be faithful in our commitments. So I will let you go at that, and we may you might ponder that if you wish, and we can talk a little bit. I did have some statements up here about this side or that side, and Hannah and I may take a few minutes to talk about that with you next week. But then she will, when she teaches next week, we start inching towards Samson, who is a very colorful fella in his own right. All right, so you guys have a great week, and see you soon.
So it's 12, what's next week? What chapter is it?
Let's see, let me look here. I believe it's at least 12 and 13. So it's kind of the intro to Samson, and then Hannah will teach 2 times in a row to cover Samson. She really wanted to do Samson. I said, you go for it. So.
Interesting stories.
It is. They are. Like I said, it's just been, when I first got this book, I thought, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
But there's a reason they're in there. So.
Yeah, that's it. That's kind of what I thought with Abimelech. Okay. It's not just
reading those stories. We were on vacation, so I didn't know that's what, but I do remember reading those stories.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my word.
Yeah, it's crazy. So we will end the last 2 weeks with Ruth. So
Okay.
That'll be
Yeah.
that'll be the breather, the reward for sticking out with Judges. But thanks for being here tonight. Appreciate it.